This week's parsha, one of the very few mitzvahs on which Chazal say, Shkulo keneged kol ha-Torah kulo. And one of those mitzvahs is tzitzis. Mitzvah tzitzis, Shkulo keneged kol ha-mitzvah shebetorah. Urisam oisei uzachartem is called mitzvahs Hashem, vasisam oisam. So a brief discussion about the essence, about the mahus of mitzvahs tzitzis. So we have a story in Menuchas Lamazayim at Beis. Levina have a kozer achoyre de mar beravashi b'shabse de rigla. It was Shabbos shel regel, and Mar beravashi is walking, and Ravina is following him, behind him. If sekane de chitei v'lo yom alev amida, and Ravina realizes that Mar beravashi's tzitzis got torn off, one of his tzitzis, and he didn't tell him anything. Kimot el when they arrived home. And Ma'avar suddenly realizes that his tzitzis are puzzle, and Ravina tells him, yeah, it didn't happen right here in your house. It happened in the middle of the street, and I saw where it happened. Why didn't you tell me? If you would tell me, I would immediately take off my talis, because I was nichshal. Which Avera was in nichshal? Who guesses? Why was Ma'avar disturbed? Why didn't you tell me? Not the yisr of walking without, of having a garment without tzitzis, but the yisr of Maaseh b'reshus harabim. Because if your tzitzis are puzzle, then it's not a beged. And those fringes, those tzitzios, are a Maaseh. And I carried the Rishus Harabim. That is why my Beravash is so disturbed. Why didn't you tell me? It was not a Rishus Harabim Dioraisa. So Ravina apologizes to Ma Beravashi, I didn't tell you because there is no chiyuv to undress in Rishus Harabim if it's just an Issa D'Rabbanan. And an Issa D'Rabbanan is nitchum em nekvay debrias. And a Choshev should stand in his sheslam, take off his shirt, take off his tzitzis. I don't know whether he wore his tzitzis on top of his shirt or under his shirt. Maybe this would be a source that you wear your tzitzis under your shirt and not on top of your shirt. And that's why it involves kvod habrias. So in days of yore, their garments had dalet kanfois. And it wasn't about your talis cotton, it was about your shirt. And therefore, it would involve kvod habrias. And because it's only nis derabanan, godel kvod habrias shedoiche iser derabanan. And now the question comes up, but he was wearing dalet kanfis without tzitzis. And that would be an iser diuraisa. So dal mahochi, the Hilchas Shabbos questions, why didn't he tell him immediately take off your garment because you have a beged of dalet kanfis and you don't have proper tzitzis? That is what the Mordechai discusses, and he brings a machlokes between two great Rishonim. Omer Arav Reb Shlomo Midarbush she'im nifsak leish chut shel talis b'Shabbos she'oser lelavshay ad she'yetakanoisa she'im lavshay oive ba'asei yesh lo dalet kanfis. So Reb Shlomo argues, you cannot wear dalet kanfis on Shabbos if you don't have tzitzis, because wearing dalet kanfis without tzitzis is an avera. It's not a lo ta'aseh, but it's a bitul mitzvahs aseh va'osu lohem tzitzis al kanfei bigdeim v'hei shivri deleisei. No, that's a mistake. Kidemuchach b'shmaten, and it proves from our Gemara, Shabbos, there is no issue to wear dalet kanfis without tzitzis. If there would be an issue to wear dalet kanfis without tzitzis, Ravina should have told Maravashi immediately, you don't have proper tzitzis. Your tzitzis were torn, take off your beged. This proves Shabbos, one could wear dalet kanfis without tzitzis. And why would that be? Why would Shabbos be different than any other day? The Ri explains. Hey Shavri Deleisei, Kidemucher Bishmaten, the Africa of the Ifsik Bekamer is the Rabbanan Shorim Mishim Kvod Habrias. דלא דחינן אלא לאו דלא יסוסור. לכן נראה לרי. The mitzvah says the tzitzis einoi elo lahatel by tzitzis kashir b'sheno. ולא יאמר הכוסף בלושן לא תלבש בגד שיש לו דן וקבל tzitzis. Das ודאי הוא הדין אימוי. Like Reb Shloima. אלא mitzvah say grade lahatel by tzitzis. ומכל מקום אין הטלס אוסר ללבוש. וגם אין אויבר, כיוון שאין אתו יוכל להטל באישהו שבס, ובכל ודאי אויבר, כל שהוא שלוב שוי, בעשי דהטל בו ציצס, וכן במזוזה ובמכה. תדע, דאותו בלוי מזוזה יעושה לקונס בבייס, אלא במועד ועשי כוח ותו לא. So that he argues, if there would be a prohibition to wear dalet canvas without tzitzis, there would be no difference between a weekday or Shabbos. And Ravina would have made Ma'aber Avashi aware immediately. You don't have a problem with Shabbos, but you have a problem, bitul mitzvah saseh, you're wearing a beged without tzitzis. But because it is a mitzvah saseh and not a mitzvah lo ta'aseh, what is the mitzvah? You got to tie tzitzis to your beged, but Shabbos you can't do that. Because kosher is a malacha diuraisa. And if I can't be makayim the mitzvah of tzitzis, because you just can't tie tzitzis in Shabbos, there is no issue to wear a beged without tzitzis. So according to Ri, I have a garment that has dalet kanfis. I just don't happen to have tzitzis at home. And it's 11 o'clock by night. Shops are closed. I have nowhere to buy tzitzis. You could wear dalet kanfis without tzitzis. Because why would that be different than Shabbos? If you could wear dalet kanfis when you don't have the means to be kosher tzitzis, and that is what the Ri argues, Shabbos is not a problem, so would that be in any other circumstance in which I just can't be kosher tzitzis right now because I don't have any tzitzis? I'm on vacation in the Alps. Nobody sells tzitzis in this little town. So could I wear dalet kanfis without tzitzis? And that would be a huge chiddush that has very vast implications. So there might be a difference between a situation in which it is just impossible to tie tzitzis because it's Shabbos, or if it's just circumstantial. The least known sefer that the Rambam wrote, and understandably so, justifiably so, is a little kuntas called the Milois HaHigoyon. And the Milois HaHigoyon, the Rambam was not only the Rambam, the greatest, or one of the greatest of all the Rishonim. The Rambam was also a philosopher. He wrote the Moed Avachim, was the greatest Jewish philosopher, probably any time. So the Sefer Milois HaGoyen, there's a very powerful line, and he says, Kol shelo yavdil bein etzem lemikra, hareu ke'einu yodea ledaber. People that aren't able to differentiate between etzem and mikra, between something that is essential and something that is coincidental. It is as if you don't even know how to talk. So this is a very fundamental distinction. And maybe at another opportunity I will explain to you an amazing Magid Mishnah explaining Halacha and Rambam based on the Havdalah between Etzem and Mikra. So Shabbos, be'etzem, you can't tie tzitzis. Nobody in the world and nowhere and never could you tie tzitzis on Shabbos because it's a lav. But the fact that you don't have tzitzis is mikra, and it's not etzem. And maybe in that case, you can't wear dalet kanfis without tzitzis. But following the logic of the Ri, why would there be a difference? Because the Ri is saying, I have a mitzvah to tie tzitzis, and if I can't tie tzitzis, I have no aveira. I don't think the mitzvah is to tie tzitzis. The mitzvah is to have tzitzis bekanfei haksus. In tefillin, maybe the mitzvah would be lohoniach tefillin. But in tzitzis is v'hoya lechem letzitzis. So the mitzvah say is not tying tzitzis. The mitzvah say is shiyu tzitzis bekanfei haksus. If the mitzvah would be to tie tzitzis, then a person would first put on the beged and then perform the mitzvah of tying tzitzis. The mitzvah is sheyiyu tzitzis bekanfei haksus, and therefore you can't put on that garment without tzitzis, and you don't put on the beged and then tie tzitzis. That would be the halach of the mitzvah would be likshor tzitzis. The mitzvah is not likshor tzitzis. The mitzvah is sheyiyu tzitzis bekanfei haksus. So it's a bit more subtle, and therefore, in the middle of the week, you don't happen to have tzitzis, but you should, and therefore you can't put on that beged. Shabbos would be different. There's a sefer Rosh Yosef. We don't have it on our sheet because not always is there a correlation between my son-in-law that prepares the Mara Makoimis and what I actually say, but usually there is. So because this is a short shiur, I want it to be interesting. Rosh Yosef Beitza Daf Tes Vav. The Rosh Yosef was the Pri Megadim. So who's familiar with the Pri Megadim? Was he a Rishon or an Achron? Who was the Pri Megadim? Was he a Rishon or an Achron? Safari or Ashkenazi, what do you know about the Pri Megadim? One of the greatest Achronim. And his Sefer Shulchan Aruch is amazing. And he has a sefer on a few Masechtas and Seder Moed, the Rosh Yosef, just as amazing as the Pri Megadim. And a Beitza Tes Vav, he writes, I have a chiddush. V'anerinu le'enon min Shemaya. And it's divine inspiration. That's what he writes. And he writes, Shabbos, if you put on a beged cheles shel klayim, you're loika, because klayim b'tzitzis is the source of asay dochel lo ta'aseh. But Shabbos, there is no mitzvah asay, according to the Ri that we just learned. Shabbos, you don't have a mitzvah asay because you can't tie tzitzis on Shabbos. And because there is no mitzvah say, there is no esa doichalois esa. And if you have klayim b'tzitzis, like amazing. So I wonder, did the Pri Megadim make a brocha on his talis Shabbos morning when he put on the talis? Yeah. If he wouldn't, that would be such a huge chiddush. It should be somewhere in the Pri Megadim, or somewhere. We never heard about anyone that doesn't make a brocha on tzitzis Shabbos. So how can he say Shabbos there is no mitzvah of tzitzis? But this touches upon the point that we're discussing. If the mitzvah would be to tie tzitzis, Pri Megadim would be right. Shabbos there is no mitzvah. But the mitzvah is not to tie tzitzis. The mitzvah is to have tzitzis bekanfei haksus. This mitzvah is Shabbos just like in the middle of the week. So when you put on your talis and Shabbos, you're makayim a mitzvah. Menachas Lamed Hey, there's a machlokes Rabbeinu Tam and Rabbeinu Eliyahu. Rabbeinu Eliyahu, the Baalei Tosfos, says that every day you need to open the kesher on your tefillin and redo it, because the mitzvah is ukshartem la'ois al yodecha. So you need to make the new kesher every day. Rabbeinu Tam disagrees. And Rabbeinu Tam says the hiduk of a kesher is like kosher, and that is the mitzvah of ukshartem. Does anybody say you need to open all the knots on your tzitzis and retie them every day? Why don't we find Rabbeinu Eliyahu by tzitzis? And by tzitzis, Rabbeinu Tam wouldn't have any counter argument, because by tzitzis there is no hiduk, and nobody says that you need to tie your tzitzis every day anew. And the answer is very simple. By tzitzis, the mitzvah is either hanocha or kshira. By tefillin. By tzitzis, the mitzvah is sheyihiyu tzitzis bekanfei aksus. So there's a Midrash in this week's parasha. Mekoishesh eitzim. And that was a tragedy. The story of Mekoishesh. So Moshe tells HaKadosh Baruch Hu, all week, the Yidden wear tefillin. And tefillin will safeguard them. They're Yireh Shamayim. They shouldn't be bori they hate. But Shabbos, there is no tefillin. So who's going to watch over them Shabbos? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Moshe, you have a point. Let's give them tzitzis. So according to this Midrash, Ikar Mitzvah tzitzis was given to us for Shabbos. Well, nobody says, Chol lavzman tzitzis, no. Tzitzis is 7 days a week, but according to the Midrash, it was all about Shabbos because Moshe complained to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that tzitzis, tefillin watches over us all week. The Rambam says, Peri Dalet Melchas Tefillin. Kol zman shahat tefillin beroisho ve'al zroya shel odom hu onov v'yirei shamayim. So the tefillin brings yirei shamayim. So Moshe complains to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you didn't give them a mitzvah of tefillin and Shabbos, so what are they going to do? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, that's an argument. Let's give them tzitzis. So the Pri Megadim says, Shabbos, there is no mitzvah of tzitzis. So what disturbs me? Well, I never feel comfortable arguing with the Pri Megadim, but especially when he says, Anerinu la'ena min shamaya. My eyes were opened from the heavens. Which heavens? This is a strange chiddush. Shabbos, there is no mitzvah of tzitzis. So the Pri Megadim didn't put on, he didn't have a Shabbos dekatalas, he didn't make a broch in the morning. Tzorech loimar, pshat in the Pri Megadim. Ese doicha lois ese. What exactly is doicha de lo tase? The mitzvah or the chiyuv? The mitzvah or the chiyuv? Pshat in the Pri Megadim is Shabbos, there could be no chiyuv in tzitzis. Because you can't tie. And the Ri says, Shabbos, you could wear a beged without tzitzis. And therefore, there is no esedei chalois esa. And that's the problem of beged sheklayim. But you definitely makayim the mitzvah of tzitzis and Shabbos. And that's why, of course, you should wear a talis on Shabbos. And you make a brocha. But we don't make a brocha on a mitzvah shel reshus. Tzitzis is not a mitzvah shel reshus. Tzitzis is a chiyuv. Shabbos, there's a technical reason it can't be a chiyuv. So there is no esedei chalois esa. But regarding the bracha, the nature of this mitzvah is a chiyuv gomor. And that's why you make a bracha regardless whether it's Shabbos or in the middle of the week. Because this is a mitzvah chiyuvis. You don't have chiyuv to wear dalet kanfis. But if you wear dalet kanfis, you have a chiyuv of tzitzis. And that is why, of course, you make a bracha Shabbos as well. It's not like matzah kol shivo that you don't make a bracha. And we discussed that, I think, some time ago. But goes without saying, of course, there's a mitzvah tzitzis on Shabbos. So pshat the Pri Megadim is, what is doicha de lo tase is the chiyuv and not the kiyum. And because Shabbos, in practicality, there is no chiyuv, and you are allowed to wear dalet kanfis without tzitzis, that is why, of course, you have a mitzvah and you make a brocha. Yoredeh daf chof ches, and it's based on a Gemara in Makos. The Gemara says, you cannot be shoichet oif or chaya and Yom Tov if you don't have offer lekisui adam. And that's a sug in the first perek of Beitza. So Reb Shlomo Eiger, anybody know who was Reb Shlomo Eiger? He's the son of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Chassidim would say the father of Reb Leibel Eiger. He was first the son of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and he asks, what is the difference between Kissi Adam and Tzitzis? Kissi Adam is not a lav. It's a mitzvah. Lechaso Yisis Adam. So why don't we say by Kissi Adam the same as the Ri by Tzitzis? If I can't put on tzitzis, I could wear the beged without tzitzis. If you can't be mechasa, then you could shecht without kisui. It's the same oinus. This is a malacha, that's a malacha. So kisi adam would be a malacha because I need to dig dirt. And digging dirt is chayrish. So why is it a prohibition to shecht if you don't have ofer lachasois? And there is no issue to put on a beged if you can't be kosher tzitzis. The reason I can't do kisui is because of meleches chayrish. The reason I can't do tzitzis is meleches kosher. Ma ben zeh lezeh. Anybody have an answer? Kol shelo yavdil ben etzem lemikra. Would that be an answer? You can never be kosher tzitzis, but you could be mechas adam on Shabbos if you have dirt. It is only coincidentally I don't have any dirt and I need to dig, and you can't dig on Shabbos. But in other circumstances, if you have dirt, then you could do kisui. So it's only coincidental that I don't have dirt to do kisui, and that is why that would be an issur. Masha enkein tzitzis b'Shabbos, and that's the teretz of the Minchas Osher to the kasha of Reb Shlomo Eiger. So we discussed mitzvahs tzitzis.